Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be talking about something a little different than what this channel is normally about, but I feel very strongly about this, that I feel like there's something still missing. I'm sure there still is, but I wanted to get you guys' take on this and plus ask you guys a question about this style of video. So stick around because it's going to be a little bit different, but I still hope you enjoy it and I look forward to engaging in the conversation with you all. If you are interested in any of my tutorial guides for Microsoft Flight Simulator, or simply interested in supporting the channel, consider joining me on Patreon. Patreon subscribers level tier 2 and above have access to all of my guides, as well as any future guides that come down the road. Patreon link can be found in the description below. Okay folks, so before we get into this, I want to make it very clear that a significant loss of life happened with the Air India 787 crash. I believe it was over 260 people lost their lives, if I'm not mistaken. And it really doesn't matter what the account was. Loss of life is loss of life, and it was a very tragic accident that I still feel like there's a piece we're missing. So I am in no way wanting this video to become a debate on the tragedy or the reality of the situation, what has happened. This is more of a technical standpoint and trying to get some of you guys' opinions on what happens and what your thoughts are with this particular crash and incident. Next thing I also want you guys to do, let me know down in the comments below if you'd like more videos like this, aviation news, not just the tragic stuff that just happens to be the one that sort of spawned this in my head today about wanting to talk more about it. But if you guys would like more videos like this, maybe doing some sort of live streams like this where we all geek out, talk about this kind of stuff, then let me know and we can certainly start setting more of that up. So I am curious about your feedback on that as well. And lastly, I want to emphasize I am not a real world pilot, much less a certified pilot or expert of the Dreamliner. This is simply me asking questions and talking about how I'm feeling about this particular scenario. They're no way meant to point fingers or to assume any kind of end point for this conversation. I'm going to try to keep this just about what my thoughts are and curious what your thoughts are as well. And again, please remember the loss of life, and let's make sure that we don't turn this into anything political or otherwise. This is simply referencing the air incident that happened with the Air India 787. So for those of you who may not know, previously there were a couple of different things that happened with this particular crash that created a lot of speculation, even with myself, as to what could have happened. First off, let's talk about this. The total flight time, I believe, of this aircraft was less than 60 seconds. Okay, that's going to come into as a very key factor here later on. The aircraft, I believe, made it to right around 400 feet, 500 feet, until it unfortunately met its end, crashing into the ground. But there's a couple things that were noticed. First off, almost immediately after takeoff, the RAT deployed, the Ram Air Turbine. Now, to my understanding and the research and all the reports that I've heard, there are only 3 scenarios in the 787 specifically in which that can happen automatically. Obviously, there is an overhead button that is a guarded switch. You would have to remove the cap, then push the button, and that would deploy the RAT. It's important to understand what the RAT's purpose is to provide emergency hydraulic or electrical power to the cockpit. That way they can continue to aviate as best they can. It does not supply any thrust whatsoever. But the 3 scenarios that will automatically deploy, my understanding, is a full hydraulic failure, a full electrical failure, or dual engine loss. Okay, so those are the 3 scenarios. Now, here's the kicker. Some of the things that were suggested was that the flaps were retracted too soon, caused the engine to stall, or caused the aircraft to stall, obviously losing the lift on the wing. However, after multiple simulated tests done by Air India, it would seem that that has been proven wrong, that even with a single engine loss, with the flaps retracted early and the gear remaining down, when with the thrust levers at full power, the aircraft continued to climb even with the flaps retracted under the same weight and same wind conditions. Now, simulators are simulators, but I can tell you right now that their simulators are far better than Microsoft Flight Simulator or any other simulators that we have access to as the general public. So let's keep that in mind. So that kind of nipped that one in the butt. And again, none of those explained why the RAT deployed. Then we talked about electrical failures and things like that, that could have happened. But then again, that wouldn't necessarily explain the dual engine loss and the loss of lift. So with the latest information that came out today, it was either today or yesterday, I can't remember when the article was released. It's coming all over the place now. CNN, ABC, Wall Street Journal, flight magazines, it's all over the place now. According to the black box, the wonderful data recorder, what had actually happened is almost immediately following rotation, the engine cutoffs or the engine fuel switches were set from run down to cutoff on both engines. According to the pilot voice recorder, again to the data that was just released, the officer flying asked the second officer, "Why did you move those down to the cutoff positions?" He says he didn't. And then shortly after, we get a mayday, mayday. Again, I am not looking to speculate here at all. This is just really weird to me because there's a lot of things that come into play here. So first off, let's talk about what it does explain. If that scenario truly happened, and again, I'm saying truly, I'm just going to keep emphasizing this because there's loss of life involved here. When I say if that truly happened, is just because we don't know, we weren't in the seat, right? And again, trying to be respectful to the loss of life. So if those events were what took place, it would explain the rat deploying, because the only thing when you park your aircraft at the gate and you toggle your run switches from run to cutoff, shutting the engines down when you park the aircraft at the gate, what keeps the rat from deploying in that scenario is the wait on wheels trigger. There's a sensor, for those of you who may not know, that when the aircraft weight or when the aircraft's wheels hit the ground, so there's weight on wheels, right? You're actually on the ground. There's a sensor that tells the aircraft flight computer and all of its systems that you're on the ground now. And the aircraft computer switches its logic, if you will, from a ground mode or from a flight mode back down to a ground mode. And then same thing when that weight comes off the wheels, we call it weight off wheels, right? Or weight on wheels negative is how I've heard it referenced according to the logic. Then that computer now knows, okay, we're in the air now, so all of its rules and processes that the computer follows now switches into its flight rules. XYZ scenarios now will take place because we're in the air, okay? And the rat being deployed is one of those. So it makes sense in the aspect that shortly after rotation, if the cutoff or the fuel switches were set to cutoff, then that would essentially trigger the deployment of the rat, because there was no longer weight on wheels, and the computer has now acknowledged that the engines are being shut down. Now, as far as checklist goes, people were talking about, I've seen a lot of comments, and this is why I'm doing this video, is to sort of get you guys' input. People are talking about different checklists about, well, they were running through a checklist. There might have been a dual engine checklist thing that caused them to switch it, right? The problem with the checklist theory on that is that if you guys go through your CDU programming, when we go through our flight planning and flight entry into the MCDU, one of the things that it asks us in the takeoff page, especially if you go over to page 2, is you have your altitude restrictions. One of those is engine out altitude. Okay, so usually it's based on company and it varies on region, but the most common is between 400 and 1,000 feet AGL. So if you get an engine out, right? So you're rolling out, you get on takeoff, you get an engine out, you continue to fly the aircraft until you reach your engine out altitude. So you continue to clean the aircraft up, you continue to accelerate. Obviously they had engine loss, so we get that part. But you're not going to start the checklist, is what I'm getting at, until you reach about 400 feet AGL. You're going to continue to fly the aircraft as you normally would until you reach that altitude at which you can start addressing the issue. That's what V1 is all about, right? At V1, no matter what happens, you take off and you fly, okay? So, that sort of doesn't make sense there. Now, here's where this gets to the kicker. Here's where I'm starting to trip out on, is if we, and I get that my experience, your experience, for anyone who's in my same boat, it's limited to simulation. I understand that. I'm limited to a flight simulator. If the fuel switches were set to cutoff at any time before rotation, right, you would have had alarms screaming, the cockpit would have lit up like a Christmas tree, master warnings, all that. So even as you're rolling down the runway, if someone had triggered set those engine fuel switches to cut off, I mean, you can simulate that even in Microsoft Flight Simulator. You do that and, you get ECAM alerts, all kinds of crap, right? So, which indicates to me or tells me that you would have had to do it right after takeoff. And I mean right after takeoff. It had to have been like clockwork, right? And again, that would explain the rat deploying. But think about also how long it takes those engines to spool down. That's the other thing. So I feel like you probably would have had time, even in that situation. And I don't know. Like, for example, one of the things that, to my understanding, the checklist for the procedure in the event of an engine out, right? And you do move, just like we saw in Miracle on the Hudson, right? The movie with or Sully, excuse me, with in regard to that accident. When they move the switches from cutoff, they're immediately back to run. So it's click, click. What they're doing is reinitiating the ignition sequence, right? So starting the engines back up again. So I figure even if somebody had moved it down, if it was by accident, and this is the part that sucks and is scary, and I'm not trying to fear monger. I just, I want to know what happened to these people, and I'm curious what happened with the aircraft. And if that happened, if somebody did manually move those down, which would have had to, because as you guys know, they have a lift gate too. So you can't, it's not just moving the switch. You have to lift the switch up and then over the gate and into the other position. So it's not something you can accidentally flick with your finger or bump, right? It's got a lift gate protection. They're protected, so you can't just bump them or flick them with your finger, whatever it may be. So there's just a lot of pieces to this that are really weird to me and don't add up to me. And I don't know. I'm not trying to do any kind of conspiracy theory. I'm genuinely asking you guys, we share the same hobby. We share the same passion. A lot of us aren't pilots. We're sim pilots, right? But we dive into this. There's a lot of us who get really passionate about, like myself. We want to learn. We want to understand. It's like all the stuff that I've been able to learn about this aircraft. I'm no 787 pilot. I'm not a Cessna pilot, So it's one of those that I'm a troubleshooter. I work IT for a living. There's a reason why I'm good at it. And yes, I'm tooting my own horn there for a second. I'm good at it because it's not enough for me to fix a problem. I need to know why it happened, right? And I know that there's a lot of information still coming out. And like I said, none of this video is meant to disrespect any of the loss of life or any of those who are working very hard day and night to try to ascertain what happened. I'm just looking for you guys as the public, as my followers, as my community to, what do you guys think? Like, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, it's all over. And there are some wild theories that I'm keeping out of this video because they're just BS, right? Like things that are just, no, settle down. Like, stop it. Now you're just making crap up. So I'm just trying to stick to the facts of what I know, and especially hearing other real world pilots and what they've said, in regard to this. And my biggest concern here is the rat. The rat to me is the key factor. The fact that the rat deployed. And that does make sense if those switches were manually moved to the cutoff position. My thing about the switches being moved to the cutoff position is, and this, I guess, maybe what I'm looking for more for you engineers, mechanics, those of you who have worked on the aircraft or understand how they operate. How long would it take, if that was noticed, to move them back to the run position? And if the engines were still spooling, if they hadn't completely spooled back down to their stopped position, right? Because if you notice on the takeoff, in the takeoff videos, there's still that heat trail coming off the engines, which makes sense. But what I'm getting at is, that tunnel effect that you get from a running engine. You can still see that. So my question here, I guess what comes down to, my theory is, or not theory, but question is, if the fuel switches were put to the cutoff position and it was noticed almost immediately, like I said, there would have been alerts in the cockpit, on the ECAM, all that. So if that happened, but the engines were still rotating at a fast enough rate where it took you guys saw how long it took, okay? But the rat deployed before, let me back up. The rat deployed before the aircraft started to fall. It was almost immediately after takeoff. So if the rat deployed, meaning that the fuel switches were in the cutoff position at that point that the rat deployed, why was there not enough time, or would there, and I'm genuinely asking, this isn't conspiracy, again, I'm genuinely asking for someone who knows, why was there not enough time to move it back to the run position? Would the engines have spooled back up in time? Could they have spooled back up in time? Or could there be another piece that isn't being shared? And I don't want to say that. I don't want to go there yet. I'm genuinely curious from a technical standpoint. For those of you who are much more brighter with aviation than I am, this is why I'm going to this channel. This is why I decided to do this, is because if there's a plethora of information, it is in this community. We dive deep, we dive hard, like some of us, do what I'm doing, some of us speculate, but there's also a plethora of you guys who are extremely knowledgeable and can shed some further light on this situation. I want to make it very, very clear, folks, please do not speculate to anything, 9/11 kind of thing. Let's not go that route. I know there's a lot of tension in that region. Certainly could be a possibility, but let's not go there for right now. Let's just stick to the mechanics of it. That's what I'm wanting to stick this conversation. Keep it to the mechanics of it. From a mechanical standpoint, Could the engines have been restarted fast enough if the voice recorder shows that the captain or whomever asked, why did you move the switches to the cutoff position? And the other officer said, I didn't. If it was noticed, how long would it have taken to simply flip them back to the run, and would the engines have spooled back up? Let me know what you guys think. I'm really curious. And again, terrible loss of life, and I hope that we come to a real reason. Let me rephrase that. A complete reason. That's a better way to say that. A complete reason to why this happened. So it can be avoided. It doesn't make sense that there's so many missing pieces to this one, it feels like. And again, to all the rescue workers and all those engineers and test pilots and everyone trying to, ascertain what did go wrong, keep doing what you're doing. And, yeah, guess we'll see what happens. Let me know what you guys think. And again, if you guys want more aviation videos like this outside of flight simulation, let me know. I'm curious to see what you guys' thoughts are on this type of video. Talk to you guys in the comments.